So one of the most critical pieces of work the board does is allocate money. And where the board allocates money is where the board wants things to occur, and it drives the entire district. So we're going to give you the first picture of our base budget. And I'm going to lessen everybody's concern. We are at a deficit. At the end, you'll see we're running at a deficit. But remember that this is the first blush of the budget. We still have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of information to collect, but I don't want anybody to panic to think that that's where we are at the end of the day. I'll present some more information to you next week that will address that deficit. So, first of all, we always think about our mission. You know, the board selected to provide the best education possible for each and every student. That's been this district's mission for as long as I've been here, and we continue to think about that and strive for that every day. We look at what a Mount Lebanon education is, and that's experiences, positive and high-quality experiences in academics, arts, athletics, and the activities. We operate under a guiding philosophy of continuous improvement, which means we're never satisfied with where we are right now. We're always trying to do a little bit better tomorrow, a little bit better the following day, and that's what continuous improvement means to us. In our strategic plan that it was adopted for next year, that'll be what this budget addresses, and we've picked 4 goals in that area, and those 4 goals were academic excellence, social and emotional learning, critical competencies, and safety and security. So those were the 4 goals that the board moved forward through in our strategic plan. And you'll see how our budget aligns to those goals. I'm going to let Rob talk to you about where we get revenues.
Certainly. This is a graph, hopefully, that's familiar from you. A lot of what Jan did, I carried forward, so it was familiar to you. It paints a great picture of where everything's coming from. 65% of our budget is from local real estate tax. We're heavily reliant on local real estate tax. That drives, 65% of our $100 million, $65 million in revenue. We're heavily reliant on that, and of course all the other taxes that come through from Mount Lebanon folks, earned income tax, local service tax, real estate transfer tax, and any delinquent taxes. So if you see 75% of that pie is made up from Mount Lebanon folks funding their schools here.
And just as a point of reference, Rob, you've been in some other districts.
Where that pie chart looks a lot differently. My former district, 78% of our budget came from somewhere else. We were only reliant on about $20 million in local taxes. So we have stakeholders that are heavily involved in the school district, as they should be, being that piece of the pie is made up so much locally. The other local source there you'll see in purple is our kind of other local interest. The majority of that is interest income. We're on pace to collect about $1 million in interest income this year. The green piece is our state subsidies. They're made up. Our biggest state subsidy actually isn't our basic ed subsidy. We have so many folks here servicing our children that our PSERS reimbursement has eclipsed $8 million with our basic ed subsidy only being $6.5 million. And then the last small piece is our federal grants. That's our Title I, Title II, Title III, and our access monies that we receive.
So that's where the money comes from, and here's where the money goes in the district.
Yes. So as you see, it's almost like the blue piece of the pie, the salaries, and then the red and the fringes makes up 78% of our budget. So 76% of our budget comes from local taxes. 78% of our budget is used to fund our employees. So those are our biggest piece, and those, of course, are all collectively bargained. It's basically the nature of our business here that we provide a service. We're not in the business of making widgets, so we do invest heavily in our people. Our next biggest column is our debt service. That's, of course, is our mortgage payment on our buildings that we pay every year. This year will eclipse about $11.1 million. And then the rest are basically services that are provided. Our consumable budget is very low. That's our supplies. That's our equipment that we buy. Services, legal, auditors, consultants. A lot of the professional services we receive are actually special ed services, outside services, of course, insurance, transportation, and any repairs and maintenance. So when you look at this, when you fill out the budget and do salaries and benefits and debt, you're at 89% of your budget already filled out before you've even taken into consideration any of the services and consumables that you're going to purchase.
So here's a chart that the board's familiar with. Many years ago, the board agreed upon a philosophical approach called student-centered budgeting. And it's a practice by which we kind of identify where we're putting most of our resources in. And obviously, in a school district, in our school, we put a lot of emphasis and our resources in the students in the classroom. So that's the teacher in the classroom with the student. School-based instructional support would be things like a reading specialist, an instructional support teacher, our nurses. Those would be school-based instructional support people. And, well, probably not nurses. Nurses would be in the next category. School-based operational support. Those would be things like our custodians at our buildings, our secretaries, our clerks at our buildings, and that's the next circle out from the students in the classroom. And finally, you get to the fourth circle, that's district-based instructional support. That would be for people like Dr. Davis, Dr. Irvin, our department chairs, our elementary grade level facilitators, things like that in that level. And then at the very outer ring, our district-based operational support, which is Mr. Marciniak's group, our IT department, district maintenance, things like that. So whenever we start to think about how we're going to budget, we really put most of our money is in the students in the classroom. So that's why that's representative with a much bigger circle. And a few years ago, Mrs. Capucci and I and Ms. Klein presented that at PSBA. And since that time, I've noticed a lot of people talking about student-centered budgeting. It's not a new process to us. We just really adopted it to make sure that it kind of led our discussion. All right, so here are the general issues for 1920. That's next year. So we know that we have a limitation on budget rate due to the Act 1 of 206. And Act 1 said, they developed an index, and they said boards cannot raise taxes beyond that index unless they applied for the exceptions. And in some cases, in the early years, there were a lot of exceptions, and that has kind of dwindled away. And this board took action to not exceed the index when we passed our preliminary budget in January. So that index equates to 0.56 mils. So we know that our target, as far as millage rate increase, would have to be below 0.56. And I'm going to tell you we're going to be able to get there, but I'm going to show you that we're not quite there yet. Some other general budget issues are PSERS increases. PSERS is our retirement system that every employee, from me on down to the food service worker, pays into as part of retirement. And Rob's going to show you a chart that had some significant increases a few years ago. That rate has gone up significantly, and the increase is much less than it was in the past. So that's starting to level out a little bit, but it's still high. So our rate of return, our rate of payment to that is still very high. We also have the state budget, and as you know, the governor proposed a preliminary budget. It showed an increase of about $95,000 for Mount Lebanon. I think in all, wasn't it about $50 million he asked the
new money,
legislature
correct,
to approve? But our portion of that, based upon a lot of factors, we think would be in about the $95,000 range. But sometimes it takes a long time for our state legislators to get that budget passed. We also know that debt service, or our bond payments, increase next year is a $500,000 increase. So just our bond payments on our elementary school renovations and our high school, just that mortgage or that bond payment that we have to make increases by $500,000 next year. And kind of a red flag that popped up this year with us, our charter school expenditures is up $100,000. So we usually pay about what, Rob?
Last year, 17-18, $365,000. We're projecting to spend $512,000 this year. And that is an increase from 25 to 33 kids, and about $13,000 for a regular education student, $23,000 for a special ed student. It gets very pricey very quickly.
And I'd like to say something. This has always been a sore subject for me, and as we develop this budget for the 1920 school year, one of the general budget issues we need to deal with is the increase in the charter school costs, which will, as we said here, is rising over $100,000 to bring it into $552,662. And that's, in the past, some of the tax increases we've had have been almost equal to that, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Steinhauer. The state of Pennsylvania's current charter school laws are characterized by the Auditor General Eugene D. Pasquale as, quote, "the worst charter school law in the nation," end of quotes. The formula that allocates money to charters is based on each school district's per student expense for the prior year, with special education costs, as Mr. Glecko said, even higher. And some issues with the charters is the lack of transparency, lack of accountability, and even though these charters are funded with public money, they can be created by almost anyone and are independent and exempt from many state and local regulations. I hope that the state will consider the legislative proposals being discussed to give the school district some relief from the current charter school law. We need a comprehensive and meaningful reforms to the charter school law to help level the playing field between the charters and traditional public schools. As the Pennsylvania School Board Association states, these reforms should address areas of charter school operations, funding, organizations, and should be subject to the same laws and regulations that all public schools must follow, including the same financial, academic, and ethical accountability standards as our school districts.
Completely agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
But I do have a question. Of those charter schools, are they actual charter schools, cyber charter schools? Do we know?
Cyber, yes. That seems to be our most common this year, yes.
So then would, I'm going to be a little out of turn. I talked last month about PSBA and the law that is in both now and being considered at the state level by the House and the Senate. And PSBA is asking for schools to reach out, or I'll bring something next month, and we can see if the board wants to make a statement regarding the
I think we
payments
should.
to
I think
cyberspace.
I 100% agree. I think we should make a statement, and, I mean, we could use some of what Mike just said and pull some of the PSBA. I know they probably have a specific request of what we say, but try to combine the two to make it a strong push that we
And-
don't agree with this.
And I know there's arguments on both sides of the fence there, but one of the highest functioning school districts academically, and why people choose to pull out is, you know, I mean, but I understand there's some personal reasons, maybe some health reasons, but a number of those people, the parents are doing their children a disservice by putting them in that.
I would like to add that although I totally agree with everything you're saying, Mike, and I think this is a concern for us, the problem is significantly accelerated for poor-performing districts, which perhaps do not have nearly the resources that we do, and they have a significant higher percentage of kids going to charter schools. So they are really getting it on both ends, and we are fortunate that we don't, but this expense for us is significant. For those schools, it's overwhelming.
I think one of my biggest concerns is the lack of oversight, financial, academic, everything, for these cyber charter schools. We don't know what's going on, and they could be teaching anything. They could be teaching,
Well, to let them get back to the budget, I'll prepare something for next week.
Thank you, Mrs.
I just want to make one more comment. There's no doubt that these charter schools, many of them, are moneymakers. And that's the bottom line. You're looking at money-making and that was why they originally set up, for profit.
Multi-billion-dollar industry.
That's right.
Yeah, we pay our full tuition for all of our activities, everything like that. We give them a lump sum, and they provide a cyber service. there's obviously a differential in cost there.
Ted.
Okay.
So I'm going to show you, I'm glad that, got some discussion going, because that is a concern in the Commonwealth, but that's just a piece of our puzzle. You go all the way back to PSERS, our debt service, charter schools, they all add up, so that means our costs are going up. And those are almost on things unrelated to what we have specific control of. We do an enrollment projection for 1920, and as you can see, we think we'll be up about 9 students. Mr. Galecko uses a similar formula to what Ms. Klein used, and that kind of gave us the numbers. And what's interesting about this, for probably the last 30 years, Mount Lebanon's enrollment has hovered right around that 5,500 student mark, maybe up a little, down a little from time to time. But in general, for a school district as landlocked as ours, to maintain an enrollment like that, there's a reason why young families come to Mount Lebanon. And I'd like to think that was because of all the nice walking opportunities they have, but I also like to think it's because of a strong educational program, and I think that number continues to support that. The areas in the Commonwealth that are seeing growth as far as students are typically areas out where they have a lot of land, the Peters Townships, the South Fayettes. They're seeing a lot of growth out there, and mostly districts landlocked like ours are seeing declines in enrollment. But we have maintained a pretty steady flow, at least over the last 10, 15 years. And I think that's a testament to the money that this board has put into the infrastructure and the instructional program, the activities. If the board didn't keep all those pieces strong, I don't think as many people would continue to live in the community. We always look at staffing changes. Let me go back one. There we go. Staffing changes are from 2009, 2009-10 school year to current. And as you can see, administration, we went down 20% or 6 administrators. We went down 10 clerical workers over that 10 years period, down a few specialists. Again, specialists are things like IT, people that provided school-based operational support. Custodial staff, we've gone down 3 staff members. The only place that we've seen an increase has been in personal care assistants. And that's likely due to the fact that we brought in our ABA program. We have an ABA class at Washington, and Mike, I think you visited that classroom. We have one over at Howe, and we have one over at Mellon. We have two at Washington. Thank you. And those are really people-intensive programs that, in addition to having at least one classroom teacher and they're a special education teacher, it's almost a one-to-one aid type situation. So although it costs us a little bit more on that end, our cost to send them out of the district would be significantly greater. So it really does save us some costs, and we get to educate our kids from our community, and that's really what we want to do. Teachers, you can see just a little bit of a change, 10 teachers over that time period, and as you see, enrollment has stayed about steady. So you can see the board has made good staffing decisions, and when possible, not replace people, look for operational efficiencies whenever possible, and that's what we continue to do. So that's just kind of a snapshot on staffing. So what are some of the employee issues? I mentioned the PSERS rate increase. So if you did nothing else, if we operated our program exactly as it is today, and PSERS just rolled forward, that would be a 0.16 mil increase. So if you did nothing else, that's what PSERS would cost us. Again, the index is 2.3% or 0.56 mils. We know that for most of our employees, we have contracts with them, and that's fortunate for us. We have a teacher's contract, clerical, secretary, custodial, food service. The only people that do not have contracts in the district are confidential secretaries, like Janine, and our specialists, like people in Chris's group. And as the board is fully aware, you approved a long list of sabbaticals next year, so we do have to account for that, those costs next year also. And for whatever reason, maybe Mount Lebanon is such a good place to teach that nobody wants to retire from here. We only had 5 retirements, 1 in the middle of the year, and 4 we've been notified for the end of the year. So we typically have planned for about 10 retirements, so that's a little bit lower too. So all these issues have an impact on how we put our budget together. And Robbie, just explain what PSERS, what that contribution curve looks like.
Certainly. So the employee contribution rate has never changed. Most employees pay 7.5% of their paycheck, and that has happened forever. The employees have always contributed their fair share.
As Mr. Cooper likes to remind us all the
I'm
time.
about ready to remind everybody why this happened. Why this happened.
So
It
through-
happened because the state, instead of funding the schools, said to the schools, oh, you don't have to pay into the retirement anymore for 7 years. 7 years they did that. The teachers continued to pay in.
So
but-
neither the school district nor the
The state.
legislators paid into that, but the teachers continued to pay their 7.5.
So that was the way the state said, oh, we're going to give you more money by telling you you don't have to pay. Now, the debt comes due.
Absolutely.
May I comment on that, please? I just wanted to add to what Mr. Cooper said. And what really, to add to that is that PSERS was investing in various high-yield bonds, and they were making up that part that the state was supposed to put into through their investments. And then in 2008 and 2009, when everything went belly up, those investments were lost by 40%. So not only could they not go and put in the percentage of that they were supposed to make up for the school district's part, but now they lost 40% of principal. So they couldn't even invest that money in there. And of course, now they were investing very conservatively. So there's a whole lot of things that went into that,
Yeah.
all of which was not good. So.
But the first thing was that they thought that was a way of, because they said they were overfunded at that time.
They were at that time, yes.
So as Mr. Cooper stated, when the getting was good, there was a few different governors' administration that used that to balance their state budget by not allocating the money towards schools. So if you see that rise in the last 10 years from 4%, 4.78, it's gone up 30 percentage points in the last 10 years, and that, of course, has affected the backs of the taxpayers in districts like this that are that pay into this. So PSERS has leveled off now, but 34 cents on every dollar that we pay is diverted to the state for the pension system. It is still underfunded. It's gotten better, but a few years ago, people that were currently collecting a pension wouldn't get it unless we were contributing that amount. So it was a crisis. I think it's been solved essentially, but there's some long-term fixes. It's going to take a very long time to realize. But
2042, I think.
so we got a long way to go, but this is what our rates are going to stick around the 35% range, at least for the next 5 years, as the actuaries project.
Okay. We always have to talk about healthcare because in most industries, you're seeing double-digit increases. We belong to the Allegheny County Health Employees Consortium. As you know, Ms. Klein was heavily involved in that, and we see our healthcare increasing just by 1.9%. And since 2015, that's about a 2.2% average increase. All of our employee groups, every single one of our employees contributes between 10.5% and 11.5% of their premium, whether that's family or whether that's individual.
I'd just like to say that Ms. Klein did an incredible job as she was basically in charge of the healthcare consortium, and I continue to thank her. And I know, Bill, you're on the board there now overseeing it, but
It's an amazing group.
yeah, they've done these increases so minimal compared to most other employers. Thank you.
Let's look at historical tax rate. So we go all the way back to 2006, 2007. You can see what the increases have been. In 2010, 2011, there was an exception an outlier for the high school bond. The district planned for that. And then there was also the reassessment year in 13-14, which kind of changed the numbers a little bit. But taking those two outliers out of that historical tax rate, our average increase has been 0.47 mils since 2006. So that just gives you kind of a historical perspective of that. So what are our current year budget trends? So Rob talked about different places where we get revenue. Our earned income tax is running about what our projections were. And those, you know, when you project revenues, you're really making a guess based upon some historical data that you have and really just trying to make a good estimate of what you think is going to happen the next year. So it's a little bit of a guess, but it's an educated guess that we determine what that earned income tax will be. Current year realty transfer taxes, that's money that we get when a house sells in Mount Lebanon, are trending just about where we budgeted for them. We saw a little decrease in tuition for international students because not as many international students are coming to the United States. And that is that's a unintended consequences of things that are going on in our world, and we're seeing less students wanting to come to the United States. So we counted on a little bit of revenue from that, but that's slightly lower than what we expected. And just remember that, you know, we do have a separate capital projects budget that's separate from the operating budget. We typically finance that with underspending from the previous year and a potential bond refinancing, and that's a little bit further down the road, probably in 2023, that we'll be even thinking about a potential bond refinancing. So we kind of have to think long-term as to where we're going with this. And as we mentioned, current year budget trends, we saw our charter school expenditure increase by $100,000. So here's the first draft base budget. You know, this is with us doing absolutely nothing to this budget. Looking at revenues, I see we are misaligned there somehow when we transferred over to this slide, but our revenues about almost $100 million. Our expenditures about 102.4, and that puts us out of balance about 2.4. Now let me tell you, last year we were at this exact same point, but we didn't show you this slide because we had already talked to the board about using 750 from fund balance to kind of offset that. So we're exactly where we were last year. But I just didn't show that slide to you yet because we have kind of a different thought about that. So that a millage equivalent out of balance is 0.9 mils. And we know that that's not acceptable. The board passed a resolution to make sure that we were below the index. So we have a lot of work to do still. So this is really just getting the raw data. Rob puts it into spreadsheets. We kind of look at it. We anticipate where we think we're going to end the year and where we think where we're going to go. We haven't begun our district-wide staffing yet. That begins in the beginning of April. But we know that we have some guidelines and ratios for things like nurses, special education teachers, the amount of caseloads. We know that IEPs drive some of our staffing costs, so we'll have to look at all our IEPs. So we're in the process right now of just building some very preliminary staffing needs, and we hope to be able to save some positions as we move through that. The legislators have not approved a budget. Governor Wolf just put it out there. We still have to look at that. And our funding allocations, although we think they're going to remain steady, we don't have any official confirmation of our federal funding yet. So what are our next steps? So we remain out of balance. We know that the index is 0.56. The administrative team, will work diligently to reduce and refine all of our expenditures. We'll consider use of fund balance. And just for the board's reference, for the last 5 years, we've used $750,000 from fund balance to help offset taxes. And we'll look for opportunities that we can increase revenues, and whether that's from raising rental rates or looking at some type of millage increase, we'll come back with a plan that we think the board will find acceptable to get us down to that 0.56. I also need to tell you that it's been the board's direction, and we are clearly aware that the board would like to add some staffing to our mental health program. And we'll be coming back with a recommendation regarding some increases in staffing for maybe school counselors. We're still finalizing the details on that, but we'll have the board was very clear with us that that was a mandate, and we are going to make sure that we address that. Again, considering what the board priorities were, consider how we can use funds to offset expenditures, and I'll bring you back a number next week. We'll do a similar presentation that will include a recommended amount use of fund balance, that will include some other recommendations regarding staffing levels, but we know that our goal is to get far below that 0.56 as we possibly can in a fiscally prudent and conservative method.
Conservative is the right word.